what is the deal with ferries? What's the deal with... The thing is, if Martha's saying do Seinfeld voice. The trouble is I end up dropping into Justin Rosniak's Cuomo. What's the deal with marine transport? Right, what is the deal with ferries? So, we must jump back to 1150. These little fools. Yes, because... Oh, let's get my miniaturized... Firstly, hello everyone, it's me. Hi. The trains of the sea. Yeah, well, yeah, you could say that, couldn't you? Let's miniaturize my face. So, what are these little dudes doing? Well, they appear to have taken a mule. And actually, this is a picture from like the medieval times. So, but I was trying. I could not find a nice picture of the ferry. Well, this is a later version of said ferry. But what am I on about? Well, basically, Birkenhead. Because we have to drop ourselves to Birkenhead because. Benedictine monks in a priory in Birkenhead start charging for the operation of a rowboat across the Mersey. So kind of the first Mersey ferry appears. Hello, Gareth. Hello. Yes, this is an episode for you specifically, Gareth. Benedictine monks they charge a pretty penny for this crossing, and so we see probably in 1150 the first ferry. The ships that moved people around had existed before. Well, this seemingly is the first example of a commercial ferry service, and it's also, I suppose, what's key about this one is it is the oldest confirmed that is still operating. If I wallop my mic arm, that it's still operating. Here's a later machine running the same service. You can start seeing this thing is a bit more sort of pleasant than just the rowboat. And today you have this admittedly pretty knackered. What is it? I suppose it's not steamship. Is it the MV Snowdrop? I'm not sure. It's the Snow. Gareth, you'll be able to say this. It's the Snowdrop, and it still runs. This is the longest commercially operating, the longest lived commercially operating ferry service in the world. I believe that's its own record in any case. So that's ferries. That is ferries, but what the key thing is more specifically to rail matter is what about railways and ferries? Where do these start getting connected? So we jump to, actually it could be any wagonway or of back in the even the 1600s, but certainly in the 1700s in the UK. Tanfield Wagonway is one of the one of the first evidenced connections between railways and the regular scheduled integrated services. So people often think that the railways and the canals, well, people often say, oh, canals got knackered by the railways, the canals came along, they became outdated, railways came along. Bzzzt, wrongo. No. Canals enabled railways enabled canals. Really, they were concurrent technologies achieving slightly different things. Yes, railways later on did replace a lot of canals, but actually, bearing in mind the railways had been in the UK since the late 1500s, railways, canals, totally interlinked, and scheduled services on the coast continued to be the main way coal. So integrated railway and coastal barge services, much like was happening at Tanfield, were the main way coal moved in Britain until remarkably recently, until the 70s. More coal that way than by, I mean, someone catch me if I'm wrong on this one, but I believe more coal that way than actually came down like the likes of the Great Central. So enormous amounts of coal still moving by barge to London on the seas, and it was an integrated system, an integrated service, and that is a ferry. So, for the first integrated passenger system, we have to jump to the Monkland and Kirkintilloch Railway, because in 1833. Here is, by the way, that train. Here it is. There's lovely. There's that train. They started operating a scheduled service across the Forth, I believe it was, and fairly soon after that, so we're seeing this, as the railways started proliferating, the need to that was Causey Arch, by the way. Yeah, there's lovely Causey Arch, this fantastic and still extant railway structure here, very nice. So, yeah, so we jumped to the London Blackwall Railway. So as the frenzy of railways exploded, the need to cross waterways without bridges also expanded. London Blackwall Railway indeed operated a 1842. There's a picture of their ferry service. They commenced a ferry service from Blackwall to Gravesend in 1842, which is one of the earliest railway shipping services. So, specific railway shipping service as opposed to the Monkland and Kirkintilloch, which was running a kind of an integrated but sort of partnered service. So, there we go. Then we jump to notice there's a bit of an emerging Scottish theme in this early railway ferry action. The Edinburgh, Leith and New Haven Railway. Interestingly, we have to talk about this guy. This is some fun. So this episode does all sorts of weird, integrated, weird, connected history stuff. History not being linear. This sort of strange interrelationships of stuff. We have to talk firstly about this boy. This is Sir Thomas Bouch. Now, why is that name familiar? We'll get to that. Because in lieu of the ability to afford, or indeed the engineering of the day, to span the Firth of Forth, he had to come up with a solution. And his solution was, began operation on the 3rd of February, 1850. And here it is, this is an illustration. The floating railway between Burnt Island and Granton. This is included. So basically, this is an extension of the East Coast Main Line. East Coast Main Line came up into Edinburgh, went up to Leith, found its way down to Granton. From Granton, there was this elaborate system of the first ever roll-on, roll-off ferry. And it allowed, with this elaborate contraption of nonsense, and it operated for quite a long time, by the way. There's a low-res pixel-free picture of the actual picture of this thing in extant in the 1880s, 1883 or 4, I think, that you can find online. And you can see this elaborate nonsense to enable, chiefly freight wagons here, to actually go on to the boat. You just chug the trains onto the boat. They roll onto the ferry, and then they roll off the ferry at the other end. So there you go. I know, right? Now, you might be familiar with Sir Thomas Bouch for something else that he did, which is this. And so there's this strange connection, because that was essentially Sir Thomas Bouch creating this ferry service, this roll-on, roll-off ferry service, to avoid the need to build a bridge because technology wasn't allowed. He then proceeded to build a bridge over an equivalent waterway that has very high winds and required a kind of a high clear distance for admiralty reasons, that obviously then fell into the sea, and effectively therefore delayed building of the bridge that was to span the Firth of Forth. Which then eventually, of course, his design was thrown out. He was ruined. This is the Tay Bridge, by the way. He was ruined. And then, of course, it took until the 1890s before we saw the vastly over-engineered and delightfully so Forth Bridge, the bridge, as it is known. The most spectacular structure in the world, to my view, but certainly one of the most spectacular. I think certainly the most spectacular structure in Britain. So there you go, wonderful. So there's this roundabout kind of strange history of crossing the Forth in Bouch's relationship with that, coming back to ferries. So there we go. We'll come back briefly to this in pictorial form later, but we have to, interestingly enough, jump forwards to 1998 to talk about the largest, so you go from that sort of little nonsense to the largest roll-on, roll-off rail ferry, which is the Skane. Actually, probably it's the Scan, I'd imagine. Interestingly, operated by Stena Line, foreshadowing. And this thing you can see, it's the world's largest roll-on, roll-off ferry. Built quite a while ago now, because we don't really make them like this. You can see it's putting a road vehicle on and off this thing at this point. But this is you can see this incredible tandem bit of S&C here to enable trains to get on and off the boat. It's very cool. Roll on, roll off.